Good morning. It's good to be with you today and to have such a vibrant theme, Stand for Justice, Stand for Justice. I'm pleased that joining me this morning is Debbie Haynes from our Worthington congregation, the pastor of the Worthington congregation. Debbie's here today to share her testimony of how God has been leading her over the last couple of years to work in justice ministry. She has become involved with the BREAD organization. BREAD, it's here in Columbus. It stands for Building Responsibility, Equality, and Dignity. And she'll say a lot about the important work that she's doing for justice in our community. Thank you, Debbie, for being with us today. This morning, I would like to read some of Jesus' words from Scripture that talk about standing for justice. And then I'd like to remind us of some of the justice ministry that persons in our congregation have been working in over the years at Restoration Plaza. I will also share some of my testimony of how I feel called to continue that work for a time. Debbie will follow, and she'll share a vibrant testimony, I'm sure, of how God has been working in her life. She has amazing testimony. We're going to, while we talk today, we're going to have a short discussion with you. Do you remember how Ruth did on one occasion in recent past? We're going to talk about some of the ministry and invite your participation of what kind of ministry is it that we do in our congregation. And we'll mention three ways. One is faithfulness ministry. It's those activities that encourage us to walk with God, and they remind us to be faithful, faithfulness ministry. We'll talk about mercy ministry, programs to help individuals in need. Sometimes we use the word compassionate ministry for that, mercy ministry. And then justice ministry. And I like how the lion said it. Did you hear? The lion said, resisting the things that are wrong, even when powerful people around us don't seem to understand. It's probably a good, fairly basic way to say that. It goes beyond ministry to individuals, and it involves social justice and responding to systems of injustice, for instance, things like poverty. So I hope you'll be thinking of those. Debbie will invite you to respond a little later. Faithfulness ministry, mercy ministry, justice ministry. And then Debbie will be sharing her call to ministry in the BREAD organization, Building Responsibility, Equality, and Dignity. I couldn't believe it the other day. It was Thursday morning, and I was hoping to finish my preparation for this service. And as I often do, I pick up my iPad and read the Columbus Dispatch on my iPad. I do it electronically. And what page do I always go to? I go to the sports page. I don't know where you go when you read the news or hear it, but I like sports, and I always want to see how my team did. The first thing I saw Thursday morning was this headline, and it said, it had our theme right in it. It said, James blew the opportunity to stand up for justice. And you've heard the story maybe that LeBron James, who's perhaps the most famous NBA basketball player, and he's on now probably the most recognized team, the Los Angeles Lakers, that he was in the news. The general manager of the Houston Rockets, that's one of the NBA teams, had tweeted, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong. What to show support for the protesters. Our own Momoko Cheng is a part of that, who did a time with us as an exchange student. To show support for the protesters that were resisting the law of the Chinese government. And LeBron then, some say tweeted, some say ill-advised, some things that he seemed to, in their minds, be more concerned about financial losses that the NBA might have. It's the second largest market, China is. And it's also, they were playing exhibition games there. I think LeBron was right there in China at the time. Some thought that what he tweeted was ill-advised, that they had hoped that he would support the moral cause of Hong Kong more. Now, my point here isn't to judge LeBron. There's more to the story, and I won't go into that. I actually like LeBron a lot. He's one of, the way he was brought up and how he's done. But what I want to point out is for us to recognize that to stand for justice, it's challenging, and there is a cost. There is a cost. So keep that in mind. So how about Jesus? Did Jesus stand for justice? There are a number of scriptures that show how passionate Jesus was for justice. I'd like to read one of them in a moment, but first let me give you a little bit of background on it. In Jesus' time in Palestine, there wasn't any middle class. There was the rich Roman rulers, and also the religious leaders were of the upper rich class. For instance, the Pharisees, you've heard about them. The scribes, others, were generally rich. The masses were mostly poor. There was the lower class called the people of the land. Roman and religious laws, unfortunately, were stacked against the poor. They really were. This is just the way it was with taxes. Besides the Roman taxes, and you've heard about those, they went to be taxed, right? They went to be counted and often to be taxed. The Jewish law, it turns out, prescribes some 24 or so religious tithes and offerings, and in many ways, those were taxes. For instance, a Jewish male, when they turned 20, had to pay a temple tax, and it was equivalent to 2 days of wages, so it wasn't insignificant for poor folk. At the time of Jesus, the Pharisees, there were many others, but one of the things they demanded was a tithe for the herbs and the herbs in your garden, even something that all had. It just altogether was a very unfair, oppressive system that kept the people poor. And this is what Jesus was talking about, the herbs that were taxed when being tithed when we read the scripture. Ruth, if we can have that scripture. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. It is these that you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. And then this next part I'd like. In the common hyperbola that Jesus spoke to show his passion for something and that we would take him seriously, he says, you blind guides, you strain out a gnat but swallow a camel. And you could imagine the impression that might give. That was Jesus. That was the passion that he was showing. Jesus called out the Pharisees and took a stand for justice. He says that it's one of the weightier, if you will, one of the most important of God's commandments. John Roberts, who passed away in June, must have heard the call of Jesus to do justice, because for the past 40 years or so of his life, he developed properties to provide affordable housing for low-income seniors. He had a vision for justice ministry for the elderly when he and Kirk Cross in 1982 put the only bid in to the Columbus School Board to buy some of their excess property around the Northland Shopping Center. And it was there that he developed the Restoration Plaza buildings and community. John was a member of our congregation. He sat about where Thomasina, it seems, would sit with Taya. And we often saw him as a failing, his health was failing, and many of you only knew him that way. But he had a passion for ministry. His focus for his ministry wasn't so much on faithfulness ministry. I didn't hear him, I'm trying to remember when I heard him preach a sermon, okay? I think I did, but I'm not sure. Or teach a class. Those kinds of faithfulness things that help us in our walk with God, that wasn't where John's focus was so much. But his ministry focus was on justice, and for 40 years for the elderly, who have been left impoverished because of society and the forces of capitalism and all. Restoration Plaza has given many residents over the years the dignity of living in an apartment on beautiful grounds, one that they can afford. My testimony today is that I've been blessed to be a part of that justice ministry of Restoration Plaza. I didn't always feel that way in the last couple of years. John is almost impossible to replace. And of course, you can never replace somebody, right? You can only do what you can do. But it was a real challenge as we saw John's health failing. It was a real challenge for us. Craig Martins and I, over the past couple of years, we asked the question, who would take the mantle of leadership there? And for us, it was quite a challenge. But then I had an experience. On the first Sunday of June, Communion Sunday, I took the burden that was on my heart to one of the prayer chairs. I hadn't gone to a prayer chair personally. I've, of course, been the one to offer prayers there, but I hadn't gone to one for quite some time. But there's a couple of leadership things were coming to my attention, and I needed prayer. I went to the prayer chair, and Jim Cummings offered a beautiful prayer for me to encourage me and acknowledging some of my giftedness. And I felt blessed to, at that point, that I could make a decision. John died the next day, and I knew that I needed to commit to the work of Restoration Plaza, and I went forward with that strength. And God has really blessed me in leading the board of Restoration Plaza, and I'm glad that I could join with others to serve in this way. So many of you have been a part of that. Craig leads the boards of the properties that are outside of Columbus, in Southeast Ohio and Independence. Jim Cummings built Plaza 2. He led that effort. Connie Hackworth's on the board. Sandy and Dawn and Caroline Reed and Craig and I minister on fellowship services every other month. Amy Wagner was a part of that for so long, and Michelle and Justin and just so many others. Nancy Cassis and Sharon. Nancy, who passed away a week ago, spent at least a dozen years, probably more. Donna and Connie, who have I forgotten? There's been so many that have done that ministry. It has been a blessing, and it's also sometimes a challenge. I want to invite Debbie to come forward. She has a strong testimony of God's leading in her life, the pastor of the Worthington congregation, working with bread, building responsibility, equality, and dignity. Debbie, I really appreciate that you've come to share your testimony today and to help us to hear and to stand for justice.
Thank you, David. This should be on, right? Okay. I got to back up. It's got a ring to it. Okay. I am so happy to be here, so pleased to be here today. I do have an amazing testimony. It's amazing to me. I can't believe where I am today. But we're going to get to that. So David told you about a system issue in affordable housing for the elderly. David was blessed and is blessed to carry on that ministry today. The system issue with affordable housing is alive and well today. In Columbus, 54,000 family units spend more than half of their income every month on housing. The amount spent on housing is not sustainable, considering other costs: food, transportation, utilities. So we'll get back to that in just a moment. But God is here today. The Sunday school class was a wonderful introduction to what we're going to talk about. So if you were there, you'll get the full message. If you weren't, we're going to fill in the gaps for you. So we talked in Sunday school class today about ways of, let me see if I can read my own writing, ways of discovering God's will. And then we talked about personal and community experience. So in June of 2018, I was a nurse practitioner. I made house calls to people that could not come into offices. So there were disabled folks, there were elderly, there were people who had dementia, anybody who had a great difficulty getting out of the house and getting to the office was who I went to see and provided primary care to them. The work was pretty intense. All the needs that a person had to have to stay home came to me. So that included every physical need that a patient might have. Everything that they got required a form, required a signature, and required faxing to a supplier who would take whatever was needed to the home. Things like prescribed medications, oxygen, hospital beds, incontinence supply, tube feeds, dressing supplies, and many, many, many others. There was little additional help with this, so it fell on me and the other nurse practitioner who was part of the practice. We were responsible for faxing. We were responsible for knowing that item got to the home. During this time, I became familiar with the mission prayer. Every day when I got in the car, I had it memorized. I would say this mission prayer. I know that it works. My testimony to you is that it works. God answers that prayer. If you don't want God to lead your life, don't pray that prayer. It became so intense that I needed a break. I took a leave from work. And while on leave, I spent a lot of time in prayer and contemplation. What was I to do? How was I to manage? I decided that I needed to retire. I thought maybe, if I just retire by the end of the year, this was again in June, July, and August, I thought just let me retire at the end of the year. I think felt like that was the way to go. So I submitted the right forms to all the right people, notified everybody that needed to be notified, and returned to work in August. Within 1 week, I knew that was not the thing to do. I knew that I needed to retire as soon as I could. My birthday was in October. I retired by the end of October, right after my 65th birthday. In early September, after I'd returned to work, Stan Moss, who was pastor at Worthington, gave me a call, and he asked me to meet him at church. He informed me that I had a call to elder. Elder? I had not had a priesthood office previously. It seemed like just a huge step to just go right into the office of elder. I did not feel it could be refused. I agreed to accept this call by mid-September and began praying, yes, a lot of prayer, preparing and planning for an ordination ceremony on November 11th. Before that ordination ceremony took place in early October, I was asked to allow my name to stand for pastor of Worthington. On November 11th, I was ordained and then elected pastor. There's more to my testimony that you'll hear in a few minutes. David and I are going to switch gears for just a second, and we're going to have a little discussion about what he introduced earlier, the faith, the mercy, and the justice ministries that you have experience with here at Grove City. So David, this is a vibrant congregation. It's an active congregation. I know that you've been involved in Open Table before. I have been to some of those meetings. We wanted an Open Table in Worthington and never quite got it up and running. So let's talk. What do you do for faithfulness ministries? And as David said earlier, these are the things that help us on our walk with God. What do we do to keep us and help us learn and be faithful?
So things like worship services and the planning that go into that. What are some other things that we do to keep us faithful?
I'm keeping count.
Wednesday night services. Sunday school.
Mm-hmm. You have more, Amy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Young Peacemakers Club, Blast.
Mm-hmm.
Cluster group. I know that Betty keeps the Northwest cluster. I hear there's a card ministry, prayer group.
Say again. Okay. Ronald McDonald House. Any others? That's a lot.
Men's activities I know as well.
Okay. Great. Okay. Cool. That's great. All right. An active and vibrant ministry for faithfulness. So let's talk about mercy. What do y'all do for mercy? And I know that you got a number of these things too.
Helping individuals in need, especially individuals we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those, Donna? What's a mercy ministry that you do? Ronald McDonald House, that's right. That's right.
Authority does activities here with women who are in need.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Women in need, some are homeless even, I think.
Food bank for the North Church.
Taking food and clothing to support the Columbus congregation, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Food bank, like the Mid-Ohio Food Bank, Nora and Pat, I think, are part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Assisting the Church of Florida.
Helping the church, the homeless church in Tarpon Springs. We give, I think we've committed $3,000 a year. Is that what I recall?
Christmas boxes.
The shoe boxes, the Samaritan's Purse shoe boxes around Thanksgiving.
Meals when people have had surgery or losses.
Mm-hmm. Support for persons, you know, in
the congregation.
crisis moments and all.
Mm-hmm.
Garage sales for campership.
Garage sales. That involves outreach to mercy ministries for those, you know, that aren't a part of our group.
Young Peacemakers Club has given gift bags to the children around the Columbus congregation.
Gift bags to the children of the Columbus congregation through YPC, the Young Peacemakers. I'm repeating so that everybody can hear.
Thomasina was able to reach out to thousands of children by just receiving goods or gifts or games that were to be disposed of by a youth warehouse. They actually reached thousands of children, like those needy children.
Carts, boxes of children's supplies that have been distributed through the fire department and other places. That's been great.
That's great. We went over 10. I had to put one hint, we're up to 12. This is 12. Okay, anything? Okay, good, great, wonderful. What a blessing to a lot of people. What do you do for justice?
Of course, we've mentioned Restoration Plaza as a place for affordable housing for seniors. And there's Mercy Ministries going on there too with our fellowship. But teaching through young peacemakers about justice.
It's a soft one, but we'll count it. Why is it so hard to do justice? You're welcome to respond, but it's okay if you don't. Why is it so hard to do justice? From Nehemiah, chapter 5, verses 1 through 13, gives us a good example of how justice work is done and was done. Sorry, I'm switching between notes, so just forgive me. Justice is hard because we can't do it alone. If you went to the office of the county commissioners and said, what you're doing about affordable housing is not enough, could you get an appointment by yourself? Maybe. Would they listen to one person for a few minutes? Would they count that? Would they consider that? Would that carry weight with them? Likely not. In our society, power comes from two sources: a lot of organized people and a lot of organized money. Think your political parties, and I'm not going political here, but the political parties have quite a bit of power because they have money behind them. But one congregation or even one person does not have enough people power to hold big institutions and political organizations and political officers accountable for doing justice. So now I'm going to go into Nehemiah 5 through 13, gives us a great introduction to this. Nehemiah, if you don't know, was a cupbearer to the king of Persia, and he goes back to his homeland in Jerusalem to help restore the people's identity by rebuilding the wall around the city. In chapter 5, the people, because of a drought, crops had failed, people were forced to borrow money, to buy food, to buy taxes, they sold their land, they sold their homes, they sold their children in order to pay the taxes. When the drought continued a second year, and the people couldn't repay the loans, the moneylenders took everything. Nehemiah was very angry when he heard their cries, and he thought it over. He had two choices. He could have done mercy ministry by opening a food pantry. He could have held or he could hold the moneylenders accountable for justice and fairness. That was Nehemiah's choice. But Nehemiah, even with the status of the cupbearer to the king of Persia, knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed more power. So in verse 7, he tells us that he organized a great assembly of people, all the people who had been oppressed, and he brought them together. He brought the moneylenders in front of them, and he said, "This must stop." When they pressed and when they saw the great assembly, the moneylenders agreed to restore everything that they had taken from the people, and they did as they had promised. To do justice, we need to be a little bit like Nehemiah. We need to build our capacity for great assemblies. I'm going to switch back to the rest of my testimony. From Matthew 23:20. David's already had that slide up, but now it's just a little bit different. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithes of mint, anise, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. It is these ye ought to have practiced, without neglecting the others. So the rest of my testimony, for the past 21 years, if we can have the Brad slide now, for the past 21 years, Columbus has had a justice organization, a social justice organization. It's made up of about 38 congregations from all across Columbus. And again, it's been in organization for 21 years. And David gave you what it stands for, the Building Respect, Equality, and Dignity. A good friend of mine introduced me to Bread. She just gave me the agenda from their what's called Nehemiah Action, which happens in the spring. And I got to go to that last spring, and David was there, and Katrina was there, and a couple other folks were there as well. I started activity last November. After I had retired, I attended a meeting and learned that this organization would be addressing a community issue. The Bread recognizes and develops community issues in house meetings based in congregations across the city. And what the congregations bring to, this is the issue in my neighborhood, this is what keeps me up at night. Bread will take that organization and see if it can be developed into something that they can address. So the meeting that I attended to was, of course, about elder care. It was about the work that I had been doing professionally for the past several years. I knew that I needed to do that. I couldn't do that while I was at work. It would have caused a conflict of interest, I think, but I had just retired. So I was free and clear to go. So it started with me offering what they called an expert testimony. I said, I think I got some background information that would help you guide and then they do research. Eventually they went and talked to every single senior support organization in Franklin County. And then they created their plan to help elderly people, what's called age in place, or age in the place that they choose if it's not in their own home. So I was attending a lot of meetings. I'm going to jump back to housing, and I hope you're staying with me. I wanted to stress the housing thing. So good news. In August, just a couple months ago, the Franklin County Commissioners voted to increase the conveyance fee, which is a fee paid when a house is sold. This money will go to the Affordable Housing Trust and help create 200 affordable housing units per year for the next 10 years. 200 affordable housing units for the next 10 years. More good news, at the end of August, a new affordable housing complex was completed in Reynoldsburg. Now the not so good. This opportunity in Reynoldsburg attracted more than 4 times the number of people that they could accommodate. That's in the Dispatch on August 30th. 54,000 people and families in need today, in this place and in this time. 200 units a year for the next 10 years. Joining or supporting Bread is one way to an active justice ministry. From Micah 6, verse 8, "And what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?" Our World Church has produced a beautiful meditative video that we're going to show now. As you engage with the sounds and the scenes from around the world, I would like for you to contemplate. Without justice, can there be peace?